He went missing. After winning the lottery in 2001, in 2021, his wife gets a cryptic postcard. The summer of 2001 had been hot, even by Missouri standards. Cracks formed in the dirt roads outside Ashbury, a small town where everybody knew. Everybody, and no one expected anything truly exciting to happen. Daniel Whitmore was a man you wouldn't look twice at. Blue jeans, grease-stained hands, and a quiet kind of smile that told you he didn't mind the life he had. He worked at Carter's Auto, 6 days a week, sometimes 7 when money got tight. He wasn't rich, but he was steady. And in a town like Ashbury, steady meant something. He was 39 the day everything changed. It was a Wednesday when he bought the lottery ticket. Just one. From the little Shell station off Route 17. He'd gone in for brake fluid, walked out with a coffee, a scratch-off, and a Missouri state ticket with 6 numbers he'd been playing for years. Nobody thought anything of it. Until Saturday morning, when Daniel stumbled into his kitchen with a yellow envelope in his hand, sweat on his face, and disbelief in his voice. "I think we won," he whispered. Lydia, his wife of 14 years, was still in her robe, sipping coffee. She thought he was joking, but Daniel wasn't a man who joked about money. She walked over, looked down, and read the numbers on the ticket. All 6, a perfect match, $1.2 million. They stared at each other in stunned silence. In a town like Ashbury, no one won the lottery. Until now. Lydia remembered that morning like it had been burned into her skin. The way Dan's hands trembled. The way he pulled her into a hug that lingered longer than usual. The sound of the TV playing in the background, something. About a storm moving in. She remembered it all. They didn't celebrate. Not really. They were cautious people, the kind who knew what came easy didn't always stay easy. But that night, they did talk. Dan said he'd quit the shop, maybe get a newer truck, pay off Lydia's medical bills. She'd been in remission for a year, but the shadow of cancer still hung over them like fog that never quite lifted. She mentioned a trip. Just one. They'd never gone anywhere. Dan always said vacations were for people with better luck. He laughed when she said it. Well, he smiled. Maybe now we got some. He was gone 2 days later. On Monday morning, August 6th, Daniel told Lydia he was heading out to look at a used Ford truck listed in Columbia. He left around 10:30 a.m., kissed her forehead like he always did, and said, "Back by dinner." He never made it home. At first, Lydia wasn't worried. Dan was slow, methodical. He'd probably stopped for lunch or gotten caught in traffic. By 6 p.m., she called his phone. No answer. By 9:30, she called the police. By sunrise, Daniel Whitmore had become a missing person. The truck he'd driven, their beat-up 1989 Chevy, was found 3 days later in a parking lot outside a Walmart. In Kansas, it was 157 miles from Ashbury, in the opposite direction of Columbia. The truck was locked. The keys were still in the ignition. No fingerprints, no blood, no struggle. Nothing missing, except Daniel. And one more thing. The money. Every penny from the lottery payout, gone. No withdrawals, no wire transfers, no trace of it moving through any known account. It just vanished, like Dan. The town was stunned. For a week he was all anyone talked about. The man who won the lottery and disappeared. Speculation grew faster than facts. Maybe he ran off, someone muttered at the post office. Bet the cancer bills got to him, another whispered. At the diner. He always seemed restless, a woman said at church, but Lydia never believed it. They'd been through too much together. He wouldn't have left her. Not without a word, not with the money, not without goodbye. Detectives ran his phone records, interviewed friends, neighbors, co-workers. Nothing. Dan's boss at Carter's Auto said he'd quit the day after he won, said he wanted a fresh start, but a fresh start didn't explain a locked truck in a different state with no activity on his cards, and it sure didn't explain what happened 20 years later. August 6th, 2021. Exactly 2 decades to the day since Daniel vanished. Lydia, now 58, lived alone in the same house. She still drove the same car, worked part-time at the pharmacy, and kept Dan's photo on the mantel. She hadn't remarried, hadn't moved. She said it felt like he might still come home someday. That morning, she opened her mailbox like she always did. Bills, flyers, a postcard. She almost tossed it in the recycling until she read the words, "I'm still watching you." Her breath caught. The card had no return address, no picture, just 5 words, scribbled in shaky black ink. She stared at it, unblinking. Her coffee dropped from her hand. She stood there in the driveway, frozen. It was how he always signed his notes. Birthday cards, grocery lists, even the notes he left on the fridge. That evening, she brought it to the police. Detective Roy Halstead was the only one still working from the original investigation. He'd been 29 back then. Now he was 49, with graying temples and a habit of rubbing his jaw when he was thinking. He looked at the card under a lamp in his office. "You sure about the handwriting?" he asked. Lydia didn't flinch. He had this way of writing his E's. Sharp, slanted. "Look right there. That's his. I'd bet my life on it." Halstead didn't doubt her. But it had been 20 years. People moved on. People forged things. People played games. The postmark was smudged. But what little was legible pointed to one place, Phoenix, Arizona. They ran the card through forensics. No usable prints, no DNA, no hidden messages. No nothing. But Halstead wasn't done. He reopened the case, and the questions came flooding back. Why now? Why Phoenix? Why just a card, and not a call? And the most chilling question of all, had Dan been alive this entire time? Watching. That night, Lydia couldn't sleep. She sat at the kitchen table, the postcard in front of her, and pulled down a cardboard box from the hallway closet. It had been taped shut for nearly 19 years, labeled in faded ink, Dan. Inside were pieces of a life, photos, tools, an old flannel, receipts, his favorite flashlight. At the bottom was something she hadn't seen since the month he disappeared, his leather-bound journal. Dan wasn't a writer, but sometimes he jotted things down, reminders, things that bothered him, names of customers. The last entry, dated just 6 days before he vanished, made her blood run cold. Feels like someone's been watching the shop. Saw a car 2 nights in a row. Gray, no plates. Thought I was being paranoid, but today it followed me down Sycamore. If anything happens, check the lottery, check Phoenix. Lydia read it 3 times. Phoenix. She called Halstead the next morning. "I think I found something," she said. The detective drove out that afternoon. He read the journal in silence, flipping through pages carefully, until he reached the last one. He tapped the word Phoenix with his pen. "You think this is where he went?" she asked. Halstead looked up. "I think this is where he was taken." But that wasn't the end of it, because just 3 days later, another postcard arrived. Different city, different woman, same handwriting, same signature. Only this time it said, "He lied to you. I never left. He vanished after winning the lottery." 20. Years later, his wife receives a cryptic postcard. And now, she's not the only one. The second postcard arrived in a city Daniel Whitmore had never stepped foot in. At least, not that anyone knew of. Las Cruces, New Mexico. It was addressed to a woman named Sarah Linden, 55 years old, retired schoolteacher, lived alone, never married, no social media. She rarely checked her mailbox unless it was bill day. That morning she found a plain, white postcard tucked between a water bill and an AARP flyer. It had no return address. The stamp was Arizona. The handwriting was sharp, hurried, almost angry. It said, "He lied to you. I never left." Sarah read it 3 times. Her heart nearly stopped. She dropped the postcard, her hand trembling. She looked around her quiet cul-de-sac. The breeze caught the edge of her robe. Sprinklers ticked in the neighbor's yard. She didn't know anyone named D. At least, that's what she told the police later. But it wasn't true. Back in Ashbury, Missouri, Detective Atakio Roy Halstead was still staring at Daniel's journal. He didn't believe in ghosts or coincidences, but postcards that show up 20 years after a man disappears don't exactly leave room for rational answers. Lydia was in the kitchen, pacing. She hadn't slept much. She kept looking out the window, as if Dan might walk up the driveway, or someone else might be watching her from across the street. Halstead's phone buzzed. Unknown number. He answered. "Detective Halstead?" "Yes. This is Officer Grant, Las Cruces PD. We just had something unusual reported. Thought it might match something in your system." "What is it?" "A postcard. Weird handwriting. No return. Signed with a D." Halstead stood slowly. "What does it say?" Grant read the message. Halstead didn't say a word for 10 full seconds. Then, "Can you send me a photo of it? Immediately." The image came through minutes later. Same handwriting, same ink, same style of card, different message. Halstead walked into Lydia's kitchen. "I think someone else knew Dan," he said softly. Lydia looked up. "Who?" He turned the phone so she could see the photo. She read the words. "He lied to you. I never left." Lydia sat down. Hard. "Who's it addressed to?" she whispered. "Sarah Linden." Never heard of her. Halstead was already 1 step ahead. He ran Sarah Linden's name through Daniel's records. No match, not a relative, no work overlap, no joint accounts. But then he pulled a piece of paper from Daniel's journal that had seemed like nothing at first. Just a list of names scribbled on a grease-smudged page. Lydia's, his mechanic buddy Paul, some family friends, and one more, S. Linden. Tucson? Halstead underlined it. Then he checked the distance between Tucson and Las Cruces. Less than 300 miles. Sarah Linden sat with a Las Cruces detective that same afternoon. At first, she said she didn't know anyone named Dan. Then she admitted something odd. In 2002, just a year after Daniel disappeared, she had briefly worked part-time at a small used bookstore in Tucson. Quiet place, paid under the table. She'd been between teaching jobs. A man used to come in every Friday. Bought used paperbacks. Always cash. Never said much, but he'd left a name once, when she accidentally overcharged him and had to fill out a refund slip. Dan W. That was it. He never came back after that. She said she'd forgotten about it until now. Back in Missouri, Lydia wasn't convinced. Why would Dan be in Arizona or New Mexico? Why not come back? Why wouldn't he send something sooner? Halstead sat across from her, his jaw clenched. "I don't think this was about the money." Lydia narrowed her eyes. "Then what was it?" The detective didn't answer right away. Instead, he pulled something out of his folder. A statement from 2001, long forgotten in the case file. It was from a man named Clint Remmer. He owned a pawn shop in Kansas, 2 blocks from where Daniel's truck was found. Back then, he said a man had come in, asked if anyone could trade cash into something harder to trace. He was vague, nervous, said he wanted to leave a town full of people with expectations. The man never gave his name, but Clint remembered his hands, calloused, greasy, like a mechanic. They showed him a photo of Daniel at the time. Clint said, "That's him." Halstead now believed Dan hadn't disappeared. He'd vanished himself, purposefully, carefully, and whatever reason he had, it was enough to leave behind his entire life, his wife, his money, his name. But that still didn't explain the postcards. Why? Now, why the cryptic tone, and most importantly, was Dan sending them, or was someone else using his signature? That night, Lydia pulled out an old answering machine she hadn't used in years. It still had the tape inside. She hit rewind, listened through the messages. It was mostly junk. Old doctor reminders, messages from friends who'd long since moved on. And then, there was one she didn't remember. Undated, just static. And then, a faint voice. Lied. "I'm sorry." The sound cracked and faded. Then it cut off. She played it again. Lied. The name only Daniel ever used for her. And then, "I'm sorry." Nothing more. She brought the tape to Halstead the next morning. He had it digitized, filtered and analyzed. The voice, what little they could isolate, matched. It was Daniel. They now had 3 things: journal entry with Phoenix circled, a voice message with a broken apology, 2 postcards sent from Arizona and New Mexico. It didn't make sense, unless Dan had started something he couldn't undo. That afternoon, Halstead received a package. No, sender listed, just addressed to Detective R. Halstead, Ashbury PD. Inside was a small, square photo. Old, weather-worn, edges curled. It showed a man leaning against a green Ford truck, wearing a flannel shirt. The background, Arizona desert. The date written in blue ink on the back, June 2003. Underneath it, one line: "Buried truths don't stay buried forever." No signature, no fingerprints, no return label. Halstead looked at the photo under a magnifying glass. It was Daniel, and he was smiling. By the end of that week, a 3rd postcard surfaced, not to Lydia, not to Sarah, but to an abandoned post office box in Yuma, Arizona. The box had been closed for 17 years, but someone still checked it. A clerk found the card when clearing out unclaimed items. The message? The money didn't disappear. You did. L. The signature was different. It wasn't D, it was L. Halstead now believed 2 people were involved. Someone was writing to Lydia, possibly Daniel. Someone was responding, or retaliating. Whoever L was, they knew where to send a card that hadn't received mail in nearly 2 decades. And they knew the truth. The truth Daniel had buried. Back at home, Lydia stared at the fire she'd built in the fireplace. It wasn't cold, but she felt frozen, inside. She thought about the last 20 years, the waiting, the dreams, the half-empty bed, and now, the possibility that Daniel had walked away. On purpose. But for what? What secret was worth 2 decades of silence? What truth was dangerous enough to vanish for? And if he was still watching her? Where was he now? Somewhere, 1,500 miles away, a man sat in a small trailer outside of Holbrook, Arizona. He wore a faded flannel shirt. His hands were scarred, grease under the nails. He stared at a stack of postcards on his table. 3 were blank. 1 was already addressed. He picked up a pen, paused, then wrote the next 5 words. He won the lottery and vanished without a trace. 20 years later, someone began sending cryptic postcards. But now, it wasn't just Daniel's voice whispering from the shadows. The photo had confirmed what Lydia feared, but refused to say aloud. Daniel had been alive 2 years after his disappearance. The man in the faded image wasn't hiding or running. He was relaxed, clean-shaven, wearing a flannel shirt that used to sit on the back of their bedroom door. And the truck in the background? Not the rusted Chevy he'd driven the day he vanished, a green Ford, newer, undamaged. No plates. Detective. Roy Halstead stared at the photo longer than he should have. Every corner of it raised more questions than it answered. Who took it? Who sent it? Why now? And most importantly, who was L? Back in Ashbury, Lydia pored over Daniel's journal again. She'd practically memorized every page by now. His last entry, about the gray car with no plates, echoed in her ears like a warning. If anything happens, check the lottery. Check. Phoenix. What did that mean? What had he gotten involved in? She wondered if he'd ever even meant to spend the winnings. Maybe the money was never about a better life. Maybe it was about buying silence or escape. That afternoon, Halstead got a call from an out-of-state number, Arizona. He answered instantly, a woman's voice, dry and cautious. "I'm calling from Flagstaff Storage in U-Haul. We just had a unit. Open up due to non-payment. It's under the name Daniel W. Hartley. We ran the ID and came across your name in a missing persons database." Halstead's heart jumped. Daniel had used an alias. Hartley was his mother's maiden name. "What's in the unit?" he asked. There was a pause. "Sir, I think you better come see it for yourself." 2 days later, Halstead and Lydia were on a flight to Arizona. She hadn't left Missouri in years. She held the postcard in her coat pocket the whole time, her fingers brushing it like a rosary. When they landed, a rental car took them straight to the storage facility. It was tucked behind an old gas station, barely visible from the main road. Beige buildings, rusted locks, gravel lot, Unit 108. The manager unlocked the roll-up door and stepped back. The air inside was stale, cold. Dust hung in the light like secrets that had waited too long to be told. Inside were 3 things: a green Ford pickup, just like the one in the photo, a large metal storage cabinet, a cardboard box sealed with black duct tape. No furniture, no clothes, no food, just these. Halstead approached the cabinet first. It was locked. The manager handed him a bolt cutter, one loud snap, and the door creaked open. Inside were dozens of handwritten notes, yellowed paper, dated between 2001 and 2006, each one addressed to L. Some were short, 2 or 3 lines. Others stretched across entire pages. Halstead picked one at random and read aloud, "I told you I never wanted this. You said we'd vanish and that'd be the end of it. But you're still watching her. I see the postcards in your truck. This isn't what we agreed on." Lydia's hand clutched her coat tighter. Postcards. This person, this L, had them, was sending them. But Daniel had been trying to stop it? She moved toward the cardboard box, cut the tape. Inside were cassette tapes. Old ones, the kind used in handheld recorders. Some were labeled, some weren't. She pulled one out. July 2003. His voice. Back in the car, they played it, static at first, then a voice, Daniel's, shaky, tired, familiar. "If you're listening to this, then something happened. I couldn't stop. Maybe Elle did it. Maybe I did. I don't know anymore. But I can't run forever. I tried. I tried to bury it, to start over. But you can't bury something that doesn't want to stay dead." Lydia. "If you ever find this, I'm sorry." Click. That was it. No more. No why. No what happened. Just guilt, regret, and a mention of Elle again. Halstead's mind was racing. The notes, the tapes, the truck, the false name. It all pointed to one thing. Daniel hadn't run. He'd been manipulated, controlled, possibly blackmailed. And Elle wasn't just a person from his past. They were still present, active, watching, sending messages not just to Lydia, but to strangers, to old P.O. boxes, someone who wanted the silence. Broken, slowly. They had the truck towed and the contents boxed up. That evening, Halstead sat at the motel, scanning every name Daniel had ever written down. Only one L. Leo R. Kramer, former mechanic. Arrested in 1998 for auto theft and parts trafficking. Served 2 years. Released in April 2001, 3 months before Daniel disappeared. No known current address. But the last known location? Tucson, Arizona. Halstead's theory was forming like a storm cloud. Leo Kramer had likely crossed paths with Daniel during or after the lottery win. Perhaps he offered him a way to hide the money, convert it, store it, disappear without tax trails or public claims. But something went wrong. Maybe Kramer got greedy. Maybe he used Daniel's trust. Maybe he followed Daniel all the way to Arizona, and maybe he never left. That night, Lydia couldn't sleep. She sat in her motel room, lights off, TV buzzing in the background. She played the tape again. Daniel's voice felt closer in the dark. She wondered if he'd been afraid, if he'd spent years looking over his shoulder. If he ever tried to reach her before but couldn't, and then she thought about something else. What if Elle had been in Ashbury? What if she hadn't just been watched, but followed? At 2:18 a.m., Halstead's phone buzzed. A call from a number tied to an old contact at the Tucson PD. He answered groggily. "What is it?" "Roy, we found something. A motel off Route 77 was sold recently. New owners clearing out the manager's office found a box of old guest logs and cassette voicemails. One of them is from 2004. Halstead sat up. "And? You're gonna want to hear it." The next morning, the file came through. An audio voicemail left on the motel's office machine. Male voice. Shaky. Tired. Familiar. "It's D. Don't let him near her."
"He's not done yet. I thought I could fix this, but he won't stop. If anything happens to me, tell her I kept my promise. I never touched the money. I never spent it." Silence. Then static. End of message. Halstead played it 3 times. Daniel
had been terrified, not of vanishing, not of being found, but of him. Leo Kramer. By the end of the week, Halstead had compiled everything. A timeline of Daniel's movements between 2001-2006, the Hartley alias, a link to Leo Kramer, multiple recorded warnings, a confirmed storage unit in Daniel's name, and, most haunting of all, letters Daniel wrote but never sent. There was only one thing left to do: find Kramer. But as Halstead prepared a plan to trace Leo's last known address, Lydia received a 4th postcard. No stamp, no delivery label. It had been slipped under her motel door in the middle of the night. This one said, "You weren't supposed to look, but now that you have, come find me." Signed, D. Lydia stared at the postcard left under her motel door. No stamp, no envelope. Just 5 words scrawled across a worn card. "Come find me. D." She ran her fingers over the paper, feeling the indent of the pen strokes. It was his handwriting. She knew it. But she also knew something else. This wasn't a message of reunion. It was a challenge. Detective Halstead had been up all night piecing together Kramer's history. Leo R. Kramer had left behind more than a rap sheet. He had patterns: motels, roadside garages, off-the-grid addresses. He rarely stayed anywhere longer than a few months. After Daniel's disappearance, Kramer had resurfaced in Yuma, then Prescott, then vanished again around 2005. But there was one address that came up again and again, used in utility bills, car registrations, and even a P.O. box rental: Silver Creek Auto Salvage, Holbrook, Arizona, a dead business, closed in 2007, but still owned under Kramer's name. Lydia insisted. Ongoing. Halstead resisted. "You're not a cop," he told her. "This could be dangerous." She didn't flinch. "He was my husband," she said. "If he's alive, I need to see him. And if he's not, then I need to know why." That was the end of the argument. They packed and drove 5 hours north, through cracked highways and lonely desert. By late afternoon, they arrived. Silver Creek was barely standing. The sign was sun-bleached, the gate rusted. Faded outlines of where cars once sat were buried under weeds, but one small trailer still stood on the lot, and the door was slightly ajar. They approached slowly. Halstead had his hand on his holster. Lydia's heart pounded. The air smelled like rust and dust. Somewhere in the distance, a windmill creaked. Halstead knocked. No answer. He pushed the door. It groaned open. Inside was chaos. Papers, tools, cigarette butts. The walls were covered in maps, strings connecting cities, photos, receipts. It looked like someone had been tracking Lydia, and Daniel, and Halstead. Pinned to the wall was a photo of Lydia at her mailbox, taken weeks ago. Then they found the table. Postcards, hundreds of them, some written, some blank, some burnt, each one in Daniel's handwriting. And one more style, slanted, precise, different ink. 2 people had been writing them, 2 people playing a game, and Lydia had been the prize. On a desk was a file folder labeled simply Ashbury. Inside were newspaper clippings, Daniel's disappearance, Lydia's public pleas, a police sketch of Kramer. Even an article about Lydia speaking at a cancer fundraiser years later. Whoever had lived here had followed every detail of her life. Halstead's voice was tense. This isn't just about running. This is obsession. And then Lydia found the photo tucked inside the drawer. It showed Daniel and Kramer, side by side, smiling, in front of a bank. Date on the back, August 4th, 2001, 2 days before Daniel vanished. Halstead picked up a notebook from the table. Inside, a rough blueprint, plan diagrams of a fake ID. Withdrawal strategies. A note, split 60-40. My cut buried in Silver Creek, his in Flagstaff. Don't contact L unless emergency. If he talks, end it. He flipped the page, another scrawl. She's looking, and she's close. Lydia's throat tightened. Was he planning to kill Daniel? Halstead didn't answer, but she already knew. Then the floor creaked, not from them, from under them. Halstead lifted the old rug in the center of the trailer. A trap door. He opened it slowly. A narrow set of stairs led into darkness. They turned on their flashlights and descended. What they found stopped them cold. A hidden room, more like a bunker. Low ceiling, concrete walls, a cot, a generator. A table with canned food, and on the far wall, a map of the United States, tacks, strings, notes, all leading to one central spot, Ashbury. Halstead's voice was low. He never left the game. He stayed close enough to watch, but far enough not to be seen. There was something else too. A black metal box, locked. Lydia opened it with shaking hands. Inside, a stack of cash. Crisp bills, still banded, each one stamped Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis. Halstead counted, $726,000. It wasn't all the money, but it was enough. Enough to prove Daniel never spent it. Enough to prove the real story wasn't about a man running from a life. It was about a man trying to escape the person who helped him disappear, and failed. They turned to leave, but on the back of the door, scratched in with a knife, were 6 words. I was never free. Neither are you. And, just below it, a small bloodstain, long dried. Halstead didn't speak for a long time. Then quietly, I think we just found where Dan died. Back in town, forensics confirmed it. Blood matched Daniel Whitmore, likely 2 to 3 years old. No body. No remains, but no signs of him ever leaving Silver Creek after 2018. And the autopsy team later uncovered fragments of a burned shirt. Flannel Lydia stood by the police tape. She didn't cry. There was no one left to perform for. No cameras. No sympathy. Just silence. And the hollow knowledge that the man she loved had spent 20 years living in fear of someone who was supposed to help him disappear. And then, the final postcard arrived. It wasn't sent to her. It was sent to Halstead, hand-delivered to his desk. No envelope, just a photo of Kramer, arrested in 2001, and a single line. You stopped looking just when you got close. Signed, D, but Daniel was dead, wasn't he? 3 days after the Silver Creek discovery, Lydia sat in the Ashbury police station, staring at the last postcard. The photo of Kramer from his 2001 arrest looked like a ghost mugshot, faded, cracked, cruel. You stopped looking just when you got close. D, but Daniel was dead. They had his blood, his burned flannel shirt, his notebook, the bunker. Every clue had led them to that trailer. So who was still writing. Halstead ordered a forensic sweep of the postcard. No fingerprints, no DNA. But the ink on the back, fresh, very fresh. It hadn't even fully dried when it was delivered. Someone wanted them to believe Daniel was still out there, or wanted them to doubt his death. Either way, it was working. That night, Lydia sat in her living room. Alone, the silence louder than it had ever been. She played the last tape again, Daniel's voice. If anything happens, I want you to know, I never stopped thinking about you. She closed her eyes, tried to remember the sound of his laugh, the way he used to fix his collar in the mirror, the way he'd say 5 more minutes every time she tried to get him out of bed, that Daniel had died long before Silver Creek. What remained was something else. Halstead, meanwhile, made one last stop. He drove to Flagstaff, Arizona, to check the second location Daniel had once marked. The site was long abandoned, an old property rental business, shuttered for 15 years. But behind the building, buried under a pile of cracked lawn chairs and discarded tools, was a rusted lockbox bolted to the concrete. He opened it. Inside, receipts, photos, a single hotel key, and one envelope. It was addressed to whoever finally gets this far. Halstead opened it. Inside was a letter. If you're reading this, it means I failed. Either I'm dead or too close to being found to run again. I didn't spend the money. I didn't want a new life. I just wanted a safer one. Kramer said he could help. Said no one would know. But he lied. He never left. He watched everything. He wanted more. And he knew if I didn't give it to him, he'd hurt her. So I ran. I hid. I stayed close. But I never touched the money. Not a dime. It's still out there. The part he didn't take. If Lydia is still alive, tell her I never meant to leave. I was trying to save her. From him. From all of this. And if you're stop. Please. Let her live. It was signed. Daniel W. No date. No location. Just closure. Written too late. Halstead didn't sleep that night. He sat in his car staring at the photo wall in front of him. 2 decades of breadcrumbs, and yet one final piece was missing. Then came the breakthrough. Tante. Archived DMV database. Halstead found a name tied to a vehicle listed under Leo Kramer's ID, but with a different face. Lucas Donnelly. A man with no birth record before 2001. No taxes, no employment history, but 3 different driver's licenses. Across 2 states, and a recent hospital visit under that name, 2 months ago, in Reno. Nevada. Halstead contacted Reno PD. The file came back with a photo, a man in his 60s, thin, gray hair, beard, scarring on the jaw, consistent with an old burn. Fingerprint data? Unavailable. Record locked under a sealed federal ID flag from years ago. The name wasn't real, but the man was. He was living in a halfway home, under care, suffering from late-stage dementia. When Halstead visited, the staff said he barely spoke. But when Halstead showed a photo of Lydia, he blinked, muttered a word, lied. The name only Daniel had ever used. Halstead sat down, spoke slowly. Are you Daniel Whitmore? The man didn't respond, but tears slipped down his face. He looked out the window and whispered, She opened the first one, didn't she? Halstead called Lydia, told her everything. She was silent on the phone. Then, after a long pause, I want to see him. One last time. 2 days later, she flew to Reno. When she walked into the room, the man looked up. His eyes were dim, but something sparked. Recognition, guilt, and maybe relief. He reached for her hand. Didn't say a word. She leaned in, whispered, I got your postcard. He closed his eyes, and for the first time in 2 decades, smiled. Daniel passed away 3 weeks later, peacefully, in his sleep. His name never entered the official records. No reporters came. No headlines were written. No money was ever claimed. The $1.2 million remained untouched. Most of it never recovered. But that wasn't the real treasure anyway. Lydia returned home. She never remarried, never told the world what really happened. But every Sunday she walked to the post office, checked her box, just in case. And one autumn morning, there was a final card waiting. No address, no stamp, just one sentence. Some disappear to be found. And below it, a sketch of a flannel shirt. Thanks for sticking with the story until the end. If you enjoyed it, give this a like and share if you haven't already, and subscribe for more.